Ethan, who is she? My name is Victoria. Why is your mistress standing in our house?
She's moving in. Who are you calling? Amara, answer me.
Someone you should have been afraid of before you brought her through that door.
Amara, who are you calling?
I need your help.
The night Ethan Carter brought another woman home, Amara Bennett thought her marriage was over. She had no idea that what happened in that house that night would eventually force her to make a decision that would shock everyone who knew her. Ethan didn't come home alone. He walked through the front door with another woman beside him, looked at his wife of 6 years, and calmly told her, "She's moving in." Amara stared at him, waiting for him to laugh and admit it was some cruel joke. He never did. Instead, he walked past her with the woman he had been hiding for months, leaving Amara standing in the middle of the home she had helped build. But Amara didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply looked at Ethan, picked up her phone, and made one call that would change the rest of their lives. What she said on that call would eventually lead to a wedding Ethan never expected to witness, and a secret that would leave him completely speechless. For 6 years, Amara Bennett had believed she understood her husband. Ethan Carter was successful, confident, ambitious, and accustomed to getting what he wanted. Their marriage had not always been perfect, but Amara had never imagined that Ethan could replace her so casually. She had built her adult life around him. She had supported him when his career was still developing, stood beside him when business was difficult, and sacrificed opportunities of her own because she believed marriage meant building something together. Ethan had always enjoyed being admired. He liked expensive restaurants, private clubs, luxury cars, and the attention that came with his family's name. Amara, on the other hand, had never cared much about being seen. She preferred a quiet life, a beautiful home, meaningful work, and the comfort of knowing that the person sleeping beside her was loyal. That was why Ethan's betrayal hurt so deeply. It wasn't only that he had another woman, it was that he had apparently been living a second life while allowing Amara to believe she was still living the first. The woman standing beside Ethan that evening was Victoria Lane. Amara had heard her name before. Ethan had mentioned her several times as a woman who worked with one of his business partners. Whenever Amara asked about her, Ethan dismissed the subject without hesitation. Victoria was just a colleague. Victoria was just someone from work. Victoria meant nothing. Amara had believed him because she had never imagined she would need to investigate her own husband. But as Victoria stood inside their home that evening wearing an expensive dress and looking around as if she were already familiar with every room, Amara suddenly remembered all the moments she had ignored. The late nights. The unexplained trips. The sudden changes in Ethan's phone habits. The way he had started locking his screen whenever she entered the room. She had convinced herself that marriage required trust. She had never considered that trust could be exactly what someone used against her. Ethan did not apologize. He did not ask Amara to sit down. He did not even seem embarrassed. Instead, he told her that his relationship with Victoria had been going on for more than a year, and that he was tired of pretending. Amara looked at him for several seconds before asking the question that was almost impossible to say aloud. She asked him if he had brought his mistress into their home. Ethan looked at Victoria, then back at Amara, and told her that Victoria was no longer his mistress. She was the woman he intended to build his future with. Then he delivered the sentence that made Amara realize how little the man she had married seemed to resemble the man she had once loved. He told her that Victoria would be staying with him, in their house, the house Amara had helped choose, decorate, and maintain for years, the house where she had believed she was safe. Amara stood there in silence, looking at the woman who had knowingly entered her marriage, and at the husband who expected her to simply accept it. That night, Amara did something Ethan never expected. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't throw anything. She simply walked upstairs and began packing. Ethan watched her from the doorway, almost amused, because he expected the tears to come eventually. He expected her to ask him to reconsider. He expected her to fight for the marriage, but Amara had reached a place inside herself where fighting for Ethan suddenly felt like fighting against reality. The man she loved had already chosen someone else. She could not force him to become loyal. She could only decide what she was willing to tolerate. Before leaving the bedroom, she looked around at the life she had spent 6 years building and realized that she was not walking away from her marriage because she had stopped caring. She was walking away because she finally understood that caring about someone did not mean abandoning yourself for them. The divorce became public faster than Amara expected. Ethan made sure people heard his version first. He described the marriage as something that had simply run its course. He never mentioned that he had brought Victoria into their home. He never mentioned the humiliation. He never mentioned that Amara had been blindsided. Instead, he presented himself as a man who had finally found happiness. Victoria stood beside him at events, smiling for cameras and behaving as though she had won something. Amara refused to participate in the spectacle. She kept her statements short, avoided interviews, and focused on rebuilding her life. Then, during one family gathering, Ethan made the situation even worse. In front of several people, he announced that he and Amara were officially ending their marriage and that he had no intention of looking back. Amara looked at him and simply said, "Then divorce me." There was no anger in her voice. That was what unsettled Ethan. She wasn't asking him to stay. The divorce was finalized several months later. Amara walked away with far less than she could have fought for because she wanted the process over. She wanted distance from Ethan, Victoria, and the Carter family name. For the first time in years, she had to figure out who she was without being someone's wife. The first months were difficult. There were mornings when she woke up and instinctively reached for her phone expecting a message from Ethan, only to remember that she no longer had a husband to call. There were evenings when she sat alone in her apartment and wondered whether leaving had been a mistake. But slowly something changed. Amara began to understand that loneliness was not the same thing as failure. She had lost a marriage, but she had not lost herself. In fact, for the first time in years, she had the freedom to discover the woman she had put aside while trying to make her marriage work. We'd love to know who's watching today. Tell us the city you're watching from in the comments, and while you're here, subscribe if you love emotional stories with unforgettable characters, powerful twists, and endings you won't see coming. Now, let's get back to the story. Amara had always possessed a talent for interior design, although she had never treated it as more than a personal interest. During her marriage, she had helped friends redesign their homes and occasionally worked on small projects, but Ethan had never taken it seriously. He believed her skills were simply a hobby. After the divorce, Amara decided to turn that hobby into a business. She started small, working from a modest office and taking projects that larger firms ignored. She worked late nights. She answered her own emails. She met clients herself. She learned the financial side of the business and slowly developed a reputation for creating elegant spaces without making them feel cold. Months passed, and the little company began attracting better clients. Amara was no longer known as Ethan Carter's wife. She was becoming known as Amara Bennett. It was during one of those projects that she met Damien. His name was not important to her at first. He was simply a private client who had requested a consultation for one of his properties. Damien was older than Ethan, more reserved, and noticeably more difficult to read. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't ask about her divorce. He didn't mention money. He listened carefully when she explained her design ideas and challenged her when he disagreed. Amara found that refreshing. After everything she had experienced with Ethan, she had expected herself to distrust every successful man she met. Instead, Damien's quiet nature made her curious. He seemed like a man who had learned to keep most of his life behind closed doors. What Amara didn't know was that Damien had spent years deliberately staying away from the Carter family. He was Ethan's older half-brother, born from their father's first marriage. The relationship between Damien and Ethan had always been complicated. They had grown up in different households and lived very different lives. Damien had built his own company independently and eventually became a billionaire, but he rarely attended Carter family events. He avoided the family's social circle and had almost no public photographs available. Even people who knew the Carter family well rarely saw him. Amara had heard Ethan mention his half-brother only a handful of times during their marriage, usually with irritation. She knew there was a wealthy older brother somewhere in the family. She simply had no idea what he looked like, and she certainly had no reason to connect the quiet man sitting across from her to Ethan. As the months passed, Damien and Amara became closer. Their relationship did not begin with grand declarations. It developed through ordinary conversations. He would ask about her business. She would challenge his ideas about the property. They began having dinner after meetings. Eventually, those dinners continued even when there was no business reason for them. Damien admired the fact that Amara had rebuilt herself without asking anyone to rescue her. Amara admired the fact that Damien never seemed threatened by her independence. He didn't need her to become smaller so he could feel important. He encouraged her to expand her company, take bigger projects, and trust her instincts. For the first time since her divorce, Amara felt safe around a man. That frightened her more than she expected. Damien had his own wounds. He rarely spoke about his family, but occasionally he mentioned his younger half-brother. He never used Ethan's name when speaking about him. He simply referred to him as his brother and admitted that they had not been close for years. Amara never questioned it. She had no reason to. Her divorce had taught her to avoid complicated family histories, and she didn't want her new relationship to become another investigation into someone else's past. Damien, meanwhile, did not know that Amara had once been married to Ethan. He knew she had been divorced, but she had never told him her ex-husband's full name. She simply called him her former husband and refused to discuss the marriage beyond that. Both of them were unknowingly carrying pieces of the same story. Their relationship eventually became serious. Damien was the first man Amara trusted enough to imagine a future with again. When he proposed, she did not answer immediately. She told him she was afraid. She told him that marriage no longer felt like a safe word to her. Damien didn't pressure her. He told her that he wasn't asking her to forget what had happened. He was asking her to decide whether what they had built together deserved a chance. Amara eventually said yes. She believed she was beginning a completely new chapter. She had no idea that the man she had escaped from was about to reappear in the middle of it. On the day of the wedding, Amara felt something she had not felt in years. She had walked through heartbreak, humiliation, loneliness, and uncertainty, and somehow she had arrived at a place where she could love again. Damien stood waiting for her, calm and composed, completely unaware of the storm that was approaching. The ceremony was intimate and elegant. There were only a few close people present. Amara never imagined Ethan would appear, but Ethan had recently learned that his former wife was marrying a wealthy man. Curiosity turned into jealousy, and jealousy turned into a need to see the man who had taken the place he once believed belonged to him. He arrived at the reception without an invitation. The moment Ethan walked into the room, he saw Amara. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Ethan looked toward the man standing beside her. His expression changed instantly. He knew that face. He knew that man. Damien turned and saw Ethan. The room seemed to become strangely quiet as the two brothers looked at each other after years apart. Amara noticed the tension but didn't understand it. She looked at Ethan, then at Damien, and finally asked the question that would change everything. She asked Damien if he knew her ex-husband. Damien's eyes remained on Ethan as he answered that Ethan was his brother. Amara stared at him. She thought she had misunderstood. Then Ethan looked directly at her and said that she had married his brother. The words seemed impossible. Amara turned toward Damien with a mixture of shock and fear. Suddenly, the mysterious man she had fallen in love with was no longer a stranger to her past. He was part of it. Damien was stunned. He looked at Amara and asked whether she had known. She immediately told him she had not. Ethan insisted that she was lying. He accused Amara of deliberately getting close to Damien as revenge. Victoria, who had arrived with Ethan, supported his story. She reminded Damien that Amara had been married to Ethan and suggested that her relationship with Damien could never have been innocent. For the first time since meeting Amara, Damien looked uncertain. He wanted to believe her, but he also knew that she had never told him Ethan's name. Amara could see the doubt in his eyes, and that hurt more than Ethan's accusations. She had already lived through a marriage where her truth had been ignored. She couldn't bear the thought of repeating it. Amara told Damien that she had no idea who he was when they met. She had never seen a photograph of him. She had never connected his mother's surname to the Carter family. She had fallen in love with him because of the man she knew, not because of his money or his family. Damien didn't accuse her again, but he couldn't immediately erase the confusion. Amara understood. She told him that she would give him the space he needed, and walked away from the wedding. She did not chase him. She did not beg him to believe her. She had learned one painful lesson from Ethan. Love could not survive when one person had to constantly prove that they deserved to be trusted. But Ethan had made one mistake. He assumed Damien would simply accept whatever story he told him. Damien had spent years building a billion-dollar business because he questioned everything. He did not become successful by believing people simply because they spoke confidently. Once the emotions of the wedding settled, he began examining what Ethan had told him. He looked at the timeline of Amara's divorce. He looked at the dates of his relationship with her. He looked at the claims Victoria had made. Slowly, inconsistencies began appearing. Ethan's version of events didn't match the records. The more Damien investigated, the more he realized that Amara could not have planned what Ethan accused her of planning, because she had met Damien before she even knew his connection to the Carter family. Then Damien discovered something far more troubling. Ethan's affair with Victoria had not been as simple as everyone believed. Their relationship had begun long before Ethan admitted it, but Victoria had also been involved in conversations about Ethan's financial future. Ethan had been frustrated by the fact that Damien controlled most of the family's wealth and had refused to give him access to certain business assets. Ethan had spent years believing that Damien's success should have been shared with him. When that didn't happen, resentment grew. The divorce from Amara suddenly looked different. Ethan had wanted a clean break, but he had also wanted to protect himself financially and position Victoria as the person who would stand beside him once he gained greater control over his own business interests. Amara eventually discovered part of the truth through an old financial document connected to one of Ethan's former business accounts. She had not been looking for revenge. She found it while reviewing paperwork related to their divorce. The information revealed that Ethan and Victoria had discussed using Amara's former connections and property investments to strengthen Ethan's financial position. Amara realized that her marriage had not only been destroyed by infidelity, Ethan had been planning his future while treating her as an obstacle he needed to remove. She could have used the information to destroy him publicly, but she chose not to. Instead, she gave the evidence to Damien because he was the person most directly affected by Ethan's actions. Damien finally understood what Amara had been saying all along. She had not married him to hurt Ethan. She had not even known Ethan was his brother. The relationship had happened by chance, but the feelings between them had been real. Damien went to Amara and apologized. He told her that he should have trusted her sooner. Amara listened quietly. She wanted to forgive him, but forgiveness did not mean pretending nothing had happened. She told him that she loved him, but she could not return to a relationship where she had to constantly defend herself against the mistakes of other people. Damien understood. He didn't ask her to come back immediately. He simply told her that he would spend as much time as necessary proving that he was not Ethan. Ethan eventually faced the consequences of his choices. Victoria's loyalty disappeared the moment she realized there was no longer anything to gain from standing beside him. The business arrangements he had made began collapsing. People who once admired him stopped returning his calls. The woman he had brought into his home as a replacement for Amara eventually left him. Ethan had believed that losing Amara would be temporary because he assumed she would always be available if he changed his mind. What he never understood was that Amara wasn't waiting for him to become a better man. She was becoming a better version of herself. Months later, Amara's business had grown beyond anything she had imagined during the darkest days of her divorce. She had completed major luxury projects and built a reputation that belonged entirely to her. She no longer introduced herself through Ethan's name. She no longer wondered what people thought about her divorce. She had finally stopped measuring her worth by whether someone chose her. Damien remained in her life, but he gave her the space to decide what she wanted. Eventually, Amara realized that what she wanted was not another perfect marriage. She wanted a relationship where two complete people could choose each other without fear, control, or dependence. One evening, Damien visited her office after she had finished work. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring jewelry. He didn't arrive with a grand speech. He simply stood in the doorway and told her that he knew she didn't need him. Amara smiled and told him that she didn't. Damien smiled back and said that was exactly why he wanted another chance. He didn't want to be the man who saved her. He wanted to be the man she freely chose. Amara looked at him for a long moment before telling him that she had already made her choice. Not because she needed a billionaire, not because she wanted revenge against Ethan. and certainly not because she wanted to prove anything to Victoria. She chose Damien because after everything that had happened, he was still the man who made her feel like she could be completely herself. Amara eventually understood something that she had not been able to understand when Ethan first brought Victoria home. Losing someone can feel like the end of your life when you're standing inside the pain, but sometimes the life you lose is simply the life you had outgrown. Ethan's betrayal had broken the future Amara thought she was going to have. It had embarrassed her, isolated her, and forced her to rebuild herself from the ground up, but it also forced her to discover a strength she had never known she possessed. She stopped asking why another woman had been chosen over her. She stopped wondering what Victoria had that she didn't, and she finally understood that Ethan's decision had never been a measurement of Amara's value. The woman Ethan once left behind became a successful businesswoman. The woman he expected to beg him to stay eventually became the woman he could no longer reach. And the man Amara eventually married was not simply a billionaire. He was the one person she never expected to meet, the brother of the man who had broken her heart, a man she had known without knowing his family name, and a man who eventually understood that loving Amara meant respecting the independence she had fought so hard to regain. Their story began with betrayal, passed through confusion, and survived a secret neither of them knew existed. But in the end, the greatest victory was not that Amara married a billionaire, it was that she finally stopped allowing someone else's betrayal to determine the value of her own life. In the end, Amara realized that the greatest thing she had lost was never Ethan. It was the version of herself who had spent years believing that she had to accept less just to keep a marriage alive. Walking away had hurt, starting over had been frightening, and falling in love again had come with a truth she never could have imagined. But sometimes, life does not take something away from us to punish us. Sometimes, it removes what is holding us back so we can finally become the person we were meant to be. Amara had once believed that Ethan was the end of her story. She was wrong. He was only the chapter that taught her how to begin again. If you knew that walking away from something painful would eventually lead you to a better life, would you have the courage to walk away? Perhaps that is the question worth asking yourself. If Amara's story touched you, let us know in the comments. Do you believe people can truly find happiness after a painful betrayal? We would love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we have more emotional stories, unexpected twists, and unforgettable journeys waiting for you. Until next time, remember that sometimes the ending you fear is actually the beginning you needed.